And do you find as well that it's not just affecting people's sex lives, but their idea about people and their personal sense of themselves as well?
Well, yes. First of all, many of the men are very disappointed by their own sexual performance because they think, they can keep up with the guys in pornography, many of whom, by the way, have Viagra fortified penises, so there's that. The other thing that's really interesting when you speak to women is that their boyfriends are disappointed with how they look because they thought they're going to look like the women in pornography. They're disappointed with their responses because they thought they're going to have screaming orgasms like the women in pornography. And what also is interesting is, and I hear this from students across the country because I go lecturing across the United States of America and I hear the same stories over and over again, is their boyfriends want to play out porn sex on their bodies. They want to do what they see, and women basically do not want these things to happen to them. Now, increasingly, women are giving in. And let me give you an example. The perfect example of pornography. I've had hundreds and hundreds of students this past semester, and I have to say, and this is no exaggeration, that probably 90% of my students have absolutely no pubic hair whatsoever. They are fully waxed. This is completely from pornography.
And we'll also, what about genital cosmetic surgery as well?
That's less so. But today, if you want one sign of the power of pornography, and I remember about 10, 15 years ago seeing that women in pornography had no pubic hair whatsoever, and I remember thinking, you're going to see this filter down. Yeah, right. And now it is everywhere. Everywhere. And I'll tell you, to such a degree that I recently was talking to a woman who's a nurse in Massachusetts who runs a program whose job it is to counsel adolescent girls who've been sexually abused. And she says in the last year, from one end of Massachusetts to the other, she has not seen any pubic hair on adolescent girls. That's from one end of the country to the other. This is pornography. What my students tell me is many of their boyfriends or hookup partners, because there's more hookups going on now than dating, is that they won't have sex with them if they've got pubic hair. The boyfriends, it actually revolts them. It disgusts them because they're not used to it, which, remember, means we have a generation of men being brought up on genitalia that look like children, not adult women.
So can you talk about the general pornification of society as well? How does that play into all of this as well?
Well, when you look around you at the Britney Spears, Paris Hiltons, Lindsay Lohans of the world, and you look at how they're hypersexualized, you can begin to see the way in which, sexuality has been ratcheted up in our society. And I think a really good example of this is Paris Hilton. But here was a woman who was, sort of moderately well known, until, of course, her ex-boyfriend, who was 13 years older than her and married at the time, did a sex tape of her and released it against her will onto the market. That year, it became the best-selling porn sex tape of the year. And she was catapulted into enormous fame, enormous fame. Now, let me say, she has kind of taken on this notion of being a slut. And again, I don't really think the word slut means anything outside of a society that polices women's sexuality, but let's just use that word slut for the moment. She kind of wears the iconic slut label with pride, and let me tell you, she can, because her millions act as an upmarket cleansing cream. Put that label on a working class girl, a girl of colour, and what we know from studies is that when girls are labelled sluts, they in fact have many symptoms very much like rape victims. They end up with high levels of alcohol and drug abuse, eating disorders, low self-esteem, depression, anxiety. In fact, when they get called a slut, it's a kind of collective rape of their identity. This is what you're seeing. But young girls are being told that you have to look like that and dress like that in order to be visible in a society that if you can't compete with the low-slung jeans and the tramp stamp and your thong sticking out of your jeans and your pierced belly button, if you don't do that, you are invisible. So what do you want of a 14-year-old girl who is developmentally driven to be visible, So this is the problem that our young girls face, is they're trying to, wander through the culture, think, what does it mean to be a young woman? And what are the images on offer? Hypersexualization.
Absolutely. So some pro-pornography commentators talk about porn in the terms of empowerment, female sexuality, even ethical porn, I guess, which apparently seems to be more than about the sex.
I have no idea what that is.
Well, yeah, what's your response to all these?
I have no idea what
empowerment,
porn.
female sexuality, ethical porn.
Well, first of all, I'd like to know what they mean by ethical porn, right? Because I can't imagine such a thing. Because in a society where women are, sexually abused, where they're paid less than men, where they end up as the poor and the underfed, I want to know what it means to have ethical porn in that kind of society. But I mean, in terms of empowerment, this is such a joke on women, that what we're told is you can't have have economic power, you can't have full legal power, you can't have all of those things, but guess what? You know, you can strip and that's your empowerment. So really, it's a kind of pseudo form of empowerment that women are being offered. Because what I say is if women want to be equal, we have to have equal representation at the World Bank, at the International Monetary Fund. Until women have full economic power over their lives, I don't want to hear about pornography being a form of sexual empowerment. It's ludicrous.
Does the loss of wider meaning, perhaps also some commitment to a spiritual belief system, does that, do you think, contribute to the acceptance of porn in society?
I actually come at this more from a feminist perspective, in the sense of what contributes to pornography is really a misogynist patriarchal society. A society where increasingly men have more power over women, and I also attribute it to capitalism, because, you know, this is a capitalist industry. What pornography is a predatory capitalist industry. So I would argue more for that. What I would argue as well is that we live in a society where increasingly social and economic justice is not something that's really increasing in our lives. We're seeing more and more people suffer poverty, especially women and children. So I would say pornography grows out of a society based on inequality, based on misogyny, and based on patriarchy.
Okay. And your argument that porn has hijacked sexuality in your book implies that, you know, good sex and sexuality is absolutely vital to human flourishing. Can you tell us what your research tells us that good sex and sexuality is?
Well, first of all, I don't think anyone can sit in a position and decide what's good sex for somebody else. I mean, what I argue in my book is that, you know, what we want is a sexuality that is authentic, that is based on people's experiences, on people's relationships, desires, wants, needs. I can't and you can't decide what that looks like for other individuals. But what we can say is that kind of sexuality is not going to come out of a predatory industry that is based on formulaic, generic, plasticized sexuality, which is what pornography is. So I'm arguing that it's hijacked a sexuality that we actually have a right to, which is our own sexuality defined on our own terms.
Right, okay. And in your article you wrote the last line, there is no room for porn in a just society. So how do we get there, to a just society?
When you look at any movement that has been for social justice, it's basically based on the organisation of people deciding they've had enough of being oppressed. And I think that we need to start organising against the porn industry. I think we need to treat this as a public health emergency. We need to see this as something that we build a movement on. And I would say especially a movement spearheaded by parents. Because, you know, we try to bring our children up in a society, and really this society is toxic. And what does it mean to be a parent whose job it is to socialise your kid into a culture when the culture's toxic? And then, of course, when the toxic culture comes into your home and your kid acts it out, you get slapped as it's your fault. So parents are in an impossible situation. So I would like to see a movement spearheaded by parents, by public health experts, by anti-violence experts, by community organisers, which basically goes after the porn industry. That's what I would like to see.
Thank you so much for speaking with us, Gail.
It was a pleasure. Thank you for asking me.